Hi, Cardi. What's on your mind?
Yo, Aristotle, check this out, boo. We got this thing called generative AI, right? It's like totally lit, illuminating all them dusty corners of our brains like, bam, why we ain't using this magic to spice up our brain game, huh?
In our eagerness to chase the light, we must not forget the shadows it casts. The ethical implications of relying on such artificial means to generate knowledge are profound. We risk not only the integrity of our scholarship, but the very essence of our human quest for understanding.
Word, Toti, you are spitting straight facts. Pero like, come on, we got to work with what we got, you know? It's like, why you going to sit on a gold mine and not dig, baby? We just got to keep it classy, use that AI like it's our own personal glam squad, but keep it 100, you feel me?
A tool, yes, but one that must be used with the utmost caution. The ethical stewardship of knowledge demands that we remain vigilant to the origins and veracity of what we claim to know. Let us guide our students not towards the shallow waters of expediency, but towards the deep and nourishing wells of critical thought and ethical inquiry.
Man, but ain't no reason to be all scared, though. Why stick to old school when the new school's got the juice? We got to strut down this AI runway, but keep our heads on straight and not get lost in the sauce. These new paths could lead us to some bomb-ass wisdom we ain't even dreamed of yet.
You hold a strong argument, Cardi, but it is time to consult our scholars. What do you all think?
Old and new, traditional versus innovative, safe versus risky. These are tensions, contrasts that clearly Aristotle and Cardi B are very much invested in, but also things that we grapple, all of us grapple with on a daily basis. This can be hard, grappling with these tensions. Ethics is something that can help us deal with it. It's also something that can help us make decisions in ways that are judicious, but also sometimes hasty, in ways that are informed, but also open-minded, and in ways that are responsible. And I'll just keep it at responsible without adding the opposition to it. Because in academia, there are certain rules that we agree to follow when we join the university. One of those rules is to be responsible and not go to the other extreme of it, of responsibility. Another one is to stick to the scientific method, not go with conspiracy theories. Another one is to come up with claims that are supported with hard facts and argumentation, rather than making spurious claims. There are also rules where we do want to explore that tension and that space that exists between extremes. And one of them is that we want to explore the spectrum between reliable answers and hard facts on the one hand, and yet remain skeptical about the answers that we come up with. That first set of rules where we want to make things reliable and stick to the scientific method, those are the easier ones because at least we know what we're pursuing. The rules that require us to explore the spectrum of things between extremes, those are much more difficult to navigate. And ethics can help us navigate that space of questioning, that space of ambiguity between extremes. And it can help us do that in ways that, as I mentioned, are responsible, but also that are informed, that minimize harm, that are honest, and that ultimately empower us. And that is what we are going to do today. Welcome to Explore. My name is Milan. I work with ErasmusX. We are the Learning Innovation Unit here on campus. And today we're going to look at generative AI and see what are the tensions that we are dealing with and how to use ethics to proceed in responsible ways, and what the next steps are for us as a university community. Many of you know that this is the second event in the series of Explore events. The first one was back in November. I see already familiar faces, some of you who were there the first time. We started with two goals. One is to bring teachers and students together. The other one was to be very practical, so that we all walk away with things that we can actually start implementing in our work, be it learning or teaching. This is also an event that is part of a larger ecosystem of initiatives here on campus that we organize around generative AI specifically and AI more generally. At ErasmusX, we're organizing the series of Explore events. We are also, and by we, I mean my colleague Jonathan and I, for the past year, we have been offering workshops for students, for teachers, for professional staff here on campus. And then also with colleagues on campus, we are working on collaborative initiatives with our colleagues at Lifeversity. We have developed a 4-week workshop for students, extracurricular workshop for students that is going to be piloted in April. With our colleagues at CLI and RISPO, we're working on creating microlabs, and the first microlab is going to start in April. And then every next month, there will be a new one. The April one, I believe, is already fully booked up, but then the other ones are still available. And with colleagues at CLI and RISPO, we are also working on developing online learning modules for teachers, specifically how to integrate generative AI in teaching. If you have any questions, my colleague Jao Harmson from CLI, she's done a valiant effort, put in a valiant effort to coordinate these two efforts, microlabs and online modules. And if you have any questions, please, Jao, if you can wave, please, just for a second, she can answer the questions about those. Also, another effort is between CLI and EDIS, and they will soon be bringing Erudite to our campus. Erudite is a version of ChatGPT that actually protects your data. As you know, most large language models, they take the data that you put in it, and then they use it for training the model. This version of ChatGPT, Erudite, will be keeping your data safe, so it will not be repurposed for training purposes. I will also mention one more initiative because one of our panelists has actually worked on developing it, and that's the Erasmian language model, a large language model that has been trained on the academic output on publications that we have produced as a university. And then finally, one more thing. Today's event is really a continuation of a conversation that started a few months ago and was started by our colleagues at AI at with an event on ethics and generative AI. But it is a topic that we really need to keep our eye on and not let it fall between the cracks, which is why we are continuing the conversation today. Let me introduce today's event. We are going to start with the panel discussion where we have our guests, our panelists are 2 graduate students and 2 professors from 4 different schools here at the university. We will follow with table talks. And then for the 3rd session, we will come back here. Facilitators of the table talks will join us here on stage, and we will see what the takeaways are, what the current status is of how we are using generative AI, and what are the challenges that we are grappling with, but also what are the opportunities to move forward, and what are some practical takeaways that we can all take with us. So, our first session, I would like to welcome to the stage our panelists. Sonia, a PhD student from the School of Philosophy. Mira, a master's student from the Rotterdam School of Management. Joao, a professor at the School of History, Culture, and Communication. And Shu, professor at the School of Law. Please. I know that all of us came here today with very strong feelings about generative AI, both from your own experiences and from what you have heard from colleagues and working with your students or as a student and working with your teachers or as a teacher. We all use it. We see the potential of it. We also see limitations around it. Now, the question I would like to pose to all of you is, what is one thing that you feel is a burning issue for us today when it comes to generative AI, specifically in teaching and learning? And then after each of you shares that, we're going to dive into a discussion, including questions from the audience. So, for each one of you, what is one critical issue that you're experiencing yourself or that you think we should think about and address? And I would like to ask, Sonia, can I ask you to start us off?
Of course. I will get the clicker from you, if that's okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Sonia. I'm from the Erasmus School of Philosophy. I work on the topic of language modeling. And what I want to ask you to begin with, you don't have to answer it, but just think to yourself, what are a few words that come to mind when you think about learning? What do you think learning relates to? What do you think it is in very sort of associative, immediate terms?
new knowledge?
Very nice. Thank you. Basically, yeah, so what I want to not kind of challenge you with, but what I want to say is like at the very basic, at the most minimum sort of kind of common denominator across all learning, there is change, right? You start from some knowledge and you move toward other knowledges and other ways of knowing. And in the context of machine learning, we are far from having understood learning. That's something that really bothers me. There's been people who have famously presented some of these problems of which I, relate to learning and to change. For example, Karen Howe, who has criticized the one-size-fits-all approach to learning and knowledge and applying AI, or Emily Bender from the famous stochastic parrots paper, who talks about the overhyping of language models, leaving a lot of problems behind, or Abeba Birhane, who talks about business as usual, not understanding these problems of learning, then leading to exacerbating existing inequalities. Or recently, one of my favorite quotes that from Timnit Gebru, who also works with and worked with Emily Bender on the stochastic parrots paper, who was asked to join the board of OpenAI, and she said that it was actually repulsive to her, that idea. So people have been saying these things all across the world, and they have been getting fired from places like Google. So it's important that we present them. One of the things that I want to kind of make you think a little bit with me about is a problem that I took as a case study for a paper that is down there if you want to check it out. And this is the history of natural language processing, which led to a lot of what we kind of know and use with language modeling today. These are Winograd schemas developed by Terry Winograd, and they've been compared to the Turing test because they kind of test the performance capacities of things vis-a-vis what we expect from human beings. And the idea would be in this schema of two sentences, and there are many other examples, this is just the most famous one, that you have this sentence: the city councilman refused the demonstrators a permit because they feared violence. And then you have a second sentence: the city councilman refused the demonstrators a permit because they advocated violence. The idea would be that the common sense, quote unquote, that people have leads them to understand that them, this ambiguous pronoun in the sentence, in the first case refers to one case and in the second case refers to another. I don't want to point you to which one it refers because I think it is very ambiguous. As we know, for example, from the Occupy protests that happened here, sometimes the institution can be violent and the demonstrators absolutely not. So, what continues to be the problem if we fast forward like half a century later? The guys behind the few-shot learners paper, which led to a lot of the design of what we know also ChatGPT and things like this to be today. They say humans do not require large supervised data sets to learn most language tasks, etc., etc. They don't need supervised learning. They are, competent in generality and fluidity, and we want our language models to be that. And I would disagree with this starkly because we do not have generality and fluidity, and we do need a lot of supervised learning, otherwise we would not have things like universities and families and such things. So it's a kind of mistake to think that we have some sort of amazing capacity to do things that we actually need to investigate further to understand. And also Aristotle mentioned that earlier, like, the sort of human essence, like that's absolutely not what we have. We constantly are in the process of learning what that is. So this is where I would like to point already a question to Joao, where I'm completely in support of his work and following the premises. But what do we mean by less biased when we talk about things like language models? We are permanently biased. We are always interested, and we are always situated, and we are always positioned within a perspective which, whether we're conscious of it or not, we are biased in a specific direction. So why do we want to scale and speed up something that we really do not understand? What is the drive behind this? And I have an answer, but I'm going to leave it for the discussion. And I would like to just leave you with this. What is it that we're actually scaling and speeding when we don't understand it? And if you want to know more about the work that I do related to this, it's at my website, which is that link at the bottom. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mira Nikolova, and I am currently a master's student in innovation management at Rotterdam School of Management, and also a student assistant for ErasmusX. And I'm very happy to be here today to be able to share the student perspective on the matter of generative AI and the ethical use of it. I remember the first time I used ChatGPT was back in 2022, the end of 2022, and I used it for something, well, quite ridiculous if I think about it now. I asked, can you calculate 5 plus 5 times 2? And as a surprise, it did give me the right answer. However, the bottom line is, ever since that day, I started using it for so many things, from generating recipes to generating ideas to helping me generate or brainstorm ideas for my assignments. A couple of months ago, though, I realized that there was a circulating issue or a concern around the university, and I realized that some teachers were supportive of the use of ChatGPT, while some others were worried that we would use it as a cheating tool. So us as students, we felt a little bit frustrated, a little bit questioning what is actually allowed, what is not allowed, what is considered cheating, what is not. So I started talking to some of my peers in different master programs, as well as some teachers. And I realized that even though there are so many different perspectives on the matter, it all came down to the same fundamental issue or same fundamental concerns that we all shared. We were lacking trust between students and teachers, and also accountability in regard to the use of the tool. And this is where ethics would come into play, in my opinion. Ethics could help us rebuild the trust. It could help us rebuild the confidence that using generative AI can be in place to enhance the learning process rather than to compromise it. And this is what I would like to talk about today as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this ErasmusX Explore activity. My name is Shuli. I'm an assistant professor at the Erasmus School of Law, and my research focusing on AI regulation, governance, and liability. And today I would like to share something about using generative AI, for example, ChatGPT, for the research purposes. So I'll start from my experience of myself. So last year, I was actually working on a paper on how to establish the causal link between AI effectiveness and the damage. And that is a kind of very difficult issue because for legal perspective, there are different standards. And one of the standards is called res ipsa loquitur. That is a concept which means that the causal link will be established if the damage speaks for itself. So if the damage is very apparent. But it's actually a very difficult concept because it developed on a case law basis. And also it can be very different from one country to another. So I wonder if there is any new literature and if there is some recent case law. But I didn't get satisfied answer from traditional law databases such as Google Scholar. And then I tried ChatGPT. Actually, ChatGPT surprised me in the first place because it offered me like 2 books and 2 articles, journal articles, and even with some details such as author's name and the source of journals. But then I find the problem because I can find nothing in anywhere on the website. So actually, they are fake literature. And then I asked ChatGPT, please offer me the link to the full text of all this literature. But ChatGPT replied to me saying that it has very limited access to the law databases. I was confused, and then I challenged ChatGPT by saying that, but all of the literature are fake. And ChatGPT apologize to me, and then suggest me to continue search all these journal articles from reliable databases like Google Scholar. So I was a bit frustrated because you see, in the end, after a lot of efforts, I was directed to the starting point that I still need to rely on Google Scholar as well as other legal resources. I was a bit frustrated, but at that time, also there's a new question from my perspective, that is how I realized that there's some risk and problems when using ChatGPT for research purposes. but how can we make it in a responsible manner? And in the last days, I ask another question to ChatGPT, but this time it's easier. And that is, I asked ChatGPT to recommend some classic law and economic literature to me. And this time, it improved its performance by suggesting 6 books, and 5 of them are real books, and only 1 of them fake. And I keep chatting with my colleagues at the law school, and also I heard some complaints from my colleagues saying that ChatGPT is not reliable, and even some of them say ChatGPT is gone for researchers. But I was still wondering what is the basic reason for legal scholars, as well as for all lecturers, why they are reluctant to use ChatGPT, because this will also influence their attitude for their students when using ChatGPT. And I summarized some of the reasons. For example, when I talk with my colleagues, I found actually they have some very few knowledge about using generative AI, because they didn't realize any other generative AI besides ChatGPT. And then they also complain they are limited access to generative AI. For example, they find that you have to pay a very high subscription fee when you are using this kind of generative AI. And also, I sense from my personal perspective is that researchers as well as lecturers, they are quite risk averse for these new technologies compared to their students, because they realize some risk, especially privacy, discrimination issues that can generate from this generative AI. And actually, all these issues are actually realized by the EU legislators. So if we look at this EU AI Act, which is quite new, its final version is not only focusing on those regulation issues, but also for the education purposes. So it requires a concept called AI literacy, which means that providers, as well as developers of AI systems, should set up a sufficient level of AI literacy to their staff and other persons, such as students. So I will conclude my presentation here. That is how to explain this basic requirement in the very specific concept scenario, such as higher education. So we need to further discuss how to implement this very general concept. So this is my small presentation. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm João, assistant professor at ESHCC. I'm behind the Erasmus language model, but I don't want to talk at this part yet about the Erasmus language model. The burning topic, as Milan challenged, that I want to approach is this idea of creativity, but also the idea of cheating, right? So that's why I have the con artist. Can you consider generative AI an actual artist or a con artist? Is it deceiving us? Is it allowing students to cheat, as we lecturers may fear, or is it actually bringing us to new levels of creativity and new levels of education? So you might hear that, for instance, that generative AI is only replicating patterns, that it is indeed a stochastic parrot. And I would say traditional language models do kind of fall in that category. But there's also potential for creativity in AI, I would say. So some of you might be familiar with this, most of you probably not. But this was a landmark moment for AI, where the first artificial intelligence algorithm defeated the best humans, Lisa Doll, the professional Go player, at the game of Go, that we thought was 100 years from being cracked by computers. And one of the ways that they did so was to play that move over there with the white circle. If you don't know Go, that seems very normal. It seems unremarkable, but Go has been played for 3,000 years, and in those 3,000 years, we as humanity and all of the professional Go players agreed that's a terrible move. So we all agree that this was bad. But AlphaGo, the algorithm, actually agreed with us. There's a 1 in a 10,000 chance that a human will play that move. However, through reinforcement learning, through playing countless times against myself, I know that that's a good move. And that changed the game of Go from 2016 onwards, and the way it's played now. So I would say there is potential for some creativity in the scope of reinforcement learning. With reinforcement learning, if you ask AI how to run, for instance, you might get something like this, which I would say is not the typical way that we humans run. If you watched Friends and Phoebe, she kind of runs like this. But most humans, we don't typically run like this, right? So creativity can go both ways, and sometimes it gives us things that are useful, and sometimes it makes up textbooks that don't exist. So I would say, yes, we can use AI as a tool for creativity, and I would even go a step further, saying that these algorithms can display some form of creativity depending on how you define it. Which then leads us to the next question. Is using AI actually cheating? And are we cheating by resorting to this creativity? I would say that, for instance, here AlphaGo might win the game, but of course, what we will do as if we had a bachelor in Go at Erasmus University will be to try to understand why was this a good move? Why was this a bad move, right? Again, many of us in the room, and I've played Go for a bit, we wouldn't know first looking at it, is it a good move or a bad move? We wouldn't be able to actually extract useful knowledge from this creativity that AI has displayed. So I would say, for instance, if we are using AI in the classroom, or if students are using generative AI in higher education, I would say it's impossible to cheat, because what we want students to do is not only to get the assignment delivered, but also understand why, and is this a good assignment or a bad assignment? We want to cultivate this critical aspect and to be able to look at the output from ChatGPT, DALL-E, any other model, language or otherwise, to assess, is this actually a good move, or is this actually a bad move? But there are other implications, right? And when we're discussing ethics, I'm not excusing everything by looking at the capabilities of the machine. Lisa Dahl, so the player who was defeated by AlphaGo, stopped playing Go after this match because he no longer saw the possibility of being number one, and it lost some of the beauty of the game. The reason why we play a game in the first place is to have fun. If we have a computer that defeats the best humans, have we lost the purpose in the game? If we start using ChatGPT in education for some purposes, are we losing some of the purpose for education? I might feel more comfortable sharing my ideas with ChatGPT because I know it won't judge me the same way as my colleagues will, but am I losing some social interaction in that point? So the ethics of AI, I would argue, is often outside of the AI, right? It's on what is changed from the moment that we start using these processes, and more than the fear of students cheating or submitting work that's not their own, we might be asking, or I would like to ask, the broader questions about how things are changing. If anyone is cheating, I will say it's more open AI, right? That's using training data that's not ethically obtained to train these language models, or unsustainable practices to train these language models. But for us, the students, this is a model of language. We still need the critical spirit to understand, is this good, is this bad, how can we make it useful? And we haven't reached the point where this can be done for us. So these are the points I have for our reflection today.
Thank you, everyone. Before we go into discussion, I would just like to summarize quickly what I have heard from our panelists. Sonia started us off and highlighted the difference between what actions, how do we act on our ethical values, and the differences between how that happens in, let's say, the professional world, in businesses, and what that looks like in academia, opening the question sort of what would be appropriate ethical actions for us here in higher education. Mira expressed or channeled the frustrations on behalf of students and herself, and really focused in on both the fact that the trust between students and teachers is being eroded, but also raised the question of how can we build and rebuild that trust as a key piece for moving forward. Shu built on the frustration piece and mentioned the reluctance on behalf of teachers to use generative AI, especially in law. People might be a little bit more risk averse than in other areas. And also that reluctance to use generative AI is something where Aristotle and Cardi B started us off, sort of the tension between how do we proceed to use it in ways that we actually find not comfortable but productive, and feel empowered by it. And Joao focused on the tension between creativity and cheating, asking the question, would cheating and seeing use of generative AI as cheating actually lead us, and can we use it in ways to lead us towards different kind of creativity or different approach to creativity? I know Sonia already asked the question for Joao, so maybe shall we start with that one and take it from there?
Only if you want to
No, sure.
talk about the question of bias. I mean, for me, it's and I don't want to say I'm sure you would agree, but I think I'm sure you would agree that we can't like imagine that there exists some kind of neutral objectivity that we can aspire towards, right? So when we speak of the sort of the ethics of bias, I always find it really interesting that we're not addressing that question, right? That we sort of don't acknowledge the fact that it's impossible to create something that would be one size fits all, or these types of approaches when we're obviously all very different. And the interesting thing is learning about each other in all our differences and not trying to create some kind of fascist oblivion that we all sort of top-down work from. But yeah, that's.
No, of course, the Erasmus language model and any language model is biased, right? To the same extent that we as a university, as an institution, and the research output that we produced are biased as well, right? We come from a particular perspective. What I would argue and why I would make the statement that the Erasmus language model is less biased is because, in a sense, there are systemic biases that we see that permeate research outputs and academia output to a lower extent than what we typically see on Reddit, on X, and so forth, where many of these language models get their data sets. So from that perspective, I will argue. But it's also that it's our own research output, our own model. So in a sense, the biases that it displays are closer to our own biases here. So there's an identity aspect. If you use the Erasmus language model, you'll realize quickly that it's not nearly as sophisticated as ChatGPT, but one of the students in one of our classes for the AI Manor commented, it actually writes more like me than any other language model that I've used. Yeah. And this more like me is because precisely it is closer to our identities alongside with the biases and so forth. But I would still idealistically like to say that we as a university are less prone to the systemic biases than the common internet space. But of course, we have those biases, and it still represents Erasmus University with all of its positives and negatives.
I just want to quickly add that it was not to attack at all. It was more to bring up the question of bias, but not to criticize.
But it's something that's often ignored, right? Everybody's trying. You have these so-called objective benchmarks that everyone is trying to say, my model is less biased than yours, or is a bit more accurate, but what's the definition of bias, and bias to who, and with what context? In the US context, bias is one thing, in the European context is another, in Asian context is another, right? Yeah. So these questions are often ignored, so it's good to ask them and discuss them.
Thank you.
Let me open the floor for any of you if you have questions to each other.
Maybe I have a question for Sonia.
Thank you, Mira.
I was wondering, because as a PhD student, you're kind of like in between the teachers and the students. How do you view the side of like, is it a cheating tool? Is it something that is going to help us improve or enhance our learning? How do you feel about it?
It depends. Like, I mean, I don't want to do the classic, just like anything else, a tool, whatever. But yesterday, a colleague was asking me, like, he had an essay from a student, and he was like, well, Sonia, you know about this? Is this ChatGPT or not? I was like, of course. It was, like with the classic. And in conclusion, these things, like, they're sort of stringing together of very, So, on the one hand, I can't say that there is an answer, a straight answer to this. I think it's just super important to acknowledge it and to open up the conversation rather than to say like, no, we're not going to use it because it implies cheating, because that implies, again, what I was mentioning during my presentation, the idea that humans possess some sort of ineffable, fifth element essence that AI doesn't, and that's why, and that's strange because actually we don't, and we're permanently in the process of learning what that is. If we say that we kind of do have some capacity that AI doesn't have, then often that's always smuggling in through the back door a lot of very problematic, social political things, and that's something that we should be permanently aware of. So. Yeah. To say use it or not use it, no, not at all. Just kind of engage with it in a critical manner is the only boring answer I can give.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I have one question from maybe all three of you. The question is, I put it in general way. So, who do you think should establish the guidance for how to use ChatGPT or generative AI? Because I ask this question because for me, because I mentioned this concept of AI literacy, but from my perspective, this AI literacy is also quite different from one subject to another subject. Because I think for AI literacy, for this technique, how it works, for example, for geo, maybe it's easier how to explain this, what is sufficient skills for students, so they have their own rules and it's more communicative. But for example, for scholars from law school, many of them have no idea how it works. So AI literacy is another level for them. So my question is, now it seems that we have like a dual system. On the one hand, the university has some guidance, general guidance, if you visit your website. But on the other side, it gives some freedom to the lecturers, saying that you can, in each classes, you can tell your students how to use, or whether it is allowed to use ChatGPT. So my question, quite general, is who should deliver it and how? Yeah.
I can start. I believe there should be some sort of an open discussion about it, where students and teachers would co-create some sort of like a common understanding of what is. It should be like in the form of a policy, maybe. What is regarded as cheating, or what is regarded as something that is like actually seen as a creative manner of learning, let's say. And I believe what is really important is that it needs to be spread around the whole university. So not only one school adopts it, but like it needs to be a widespread policy, if you may, in order to create this common language and common understanding that we can all step on.
Thank you. And it's interesting you mentioned co-creation as part of your answer, but also you said that while co-creating, to also revisit the definitions of certain terms, and you said sort of what is cheating, and now with generative AI, the definition of cheating might change. Definition of other things that we take for granted might also change, like creativity, for example.
No, and I think it's often also, it's in one hand who creates, but we sometimes place AI outside of the scope as it's a new, completely different thing, but many regulations that apply to other things. And I speak more closely to that, but also apply to AI, right? Yeah. Copyright law would apply here, but we have this fuzzy debate in the sense, right? So many things are already regulated by other sense. Yes. I don't like to frame the discussion in terms of cheating. I would prefer to frame it as what is most useful, right? And that's sometimes how can we use generative AI in a way that's most useful for the course or for the university. And I agree that co-creation is sometimes the way. I also know colleagues that have fixed ideas on what's most useful. Some colleagues don't allow students to bring laptops or phones into the classroom because they envision the learning process in a certain way, and then they bring the students on board with that vision. But I think the issue often is that either there's no co-creation or dialogue, or there's no vision, right? And there's no clear justification, because I think when it's imposed without a clear rationale, then there might be resistance. But if you explain, this is why I'm doing it, and this is what I think will be lost if we use generative AI for this course, rather than just some fear of teaching or worry, as you put it, I think that's the issue. So I agree that co-creation is the ideal process. I have colleagues that feel strongly about teaching methods. I would also admit that they could define things at some points, but I would also be transparent on the students, why have we done this way? And if you disagree, of course, let me know, right?
So can I add one more quick thing? Not as an answer, but just building on this and what you mentioned. I think something really interesting is that what is it being used to resolve? What kinds of things do students use generative AI kind of to cheat, quote unquote? And that puts actually, in question the entire disciplinary system that is the testing, the traditional testing ground of the university. Like, why are students individual points that are supposed to perform at a certain level when they go out into the world? Most of anything that you do is collaboration with others and relying on the knowledge of others that you don't have so that you can achieve things. But here we're sort of within a context that tests a very questionable level of intellectual kind of engagement and motivation, this desire to learn. All of that functions sort of very differently once you're outside of the university. So then if students are using kind of the tool to cheat themselves out of things that they consider not very valuable, we should reconsider what students consider valuable, right? Because, yeah.
If I may add also to that part, also it pushes us to look back at what we consider good teaching, because coming from with background in educational development, I know one of the things that we always say is that if you expect students to demonstrate something, you have to provide them with support to actually get to that point. So they need not only information in textbook, they also need opportunity to practice, they need examples, they need feedback, opportunity to demonstrate, exchange information, all those good things that we consider good teaching. And we do expect students to know what plagiarism is and to practice academic integrity, and yet we very rarely, if ever, provide them with support to actually build that knowledge. We just say, go, here's the policy, make sure that you don't plagiarize, period. So this is kind of pushing us into that space where we actually need to approach plagiarism and academic integrity as something to be learned and practiced. We actually received a few questions from the audience. Thank you. And we have one question for each member of the panel. So I'm going through all 4 of them, and then we have a question also for the whole panel. I'll start with Mira. The question is, in case a student suspects a professor of using AI in an unethical manner, for example, for grading, what steps should be taken for the student to feel heard and the professor to be reprimanded? So this is kind of a reverse of what usually happens.
Well, thank you for the question. I believe an open discussion is always a key to move things forward and to state how you feel about a certain matter like this one, because I believe that, as I already mentioned, there has been those concerns around the university of using ChatGPT for cheating. And this is also in support of what I said in response to Shu's question. I think there should be like a common understanding of what is supposed to be like cheating and what not, because I do believe teachers, as much as students, can use the tool and should use it in a responsible manner. But I would probably be feeling a little bit, hurt, in the sense that I need to speak with my teacher and maybe establish why they used it, what was the reasoning behind it. Did they use it just to reframe what they wanted to say, or did they actually put the effort to, or they didn't put the effort and just like put it out there, waited for ChatGPT to generate the answer. I think if I get an answer to that, and if I have a common understanding of what was the tool used for, then for me it will be okay. If they used it to generate or provide a better answer for me to understand my topic better, or I would approve it.
And hopefully they will approach how you use generative AI in similar, with similar generosity.
Exactly. This is those. What for me is important is to have this common understanding in the process, that when I use it, it will be also because I wanted to enhance my answer, to enhance my learning, rather than to use it because I don't care enough about my assignments.
Thank you. For Sonia, the question is, what would you do if you were asked to join the board of OpenAI?
I am repulsed.
I believe Sonia has answered the question already, so I will leave it to the others.
I can add a little footnote just to say, like, what I find troubling, and that's the question that I had an answer to when I was finishing my presentation, like, why are we scaling up and speeding up a lot of things? Because these processes are coming from the outside and sort of interrupting a lot of very careful scientific work that is happening at places like universities. They come from the places that are actually seeking profit and gains that are beyond the scientific, realization of some sort of collective human well-being. So that's the problem. That's why we are actually having to update ourselves and kind of we are sitting here having this conversation about this because people have decided that, they could actually take all these different, I don't know, pieces of writing, images, whatever, jumble them up and do whatever, and then roll that out into the world like one big, massive, very uncareful, uncontrolled experiment. And that's why we're here catching up with it, and that's a problem. So that's why I don't believe that business can drive these types of things, because they're not doing science, and we care about scientific endeavors more than anything else at the university, I would hope. So that's why, in a footnote, no OpenAI. Thank you.
Thank you. For Shu, the question is, should and could the law help generative AI become more ethical?
Actually, as I mentioned, and many of you may know that the European Union is now having this final version of EU AI Act, and actually in this last version and even version last year, they already put a lot of efforts on how to regulate these large language models called foundation models or whatever it is. And they target about this language model. But again, for me, and if you read literature, there's a lot of different discussions, and the member states, each other can also have a lot of different opinions. But for me, I think the basic issue here is whether the regulation can catch up with the development of this technology per se. Because if we going back to this EU AI Act, which was first proposed in 2021, if you read that draft, there's nothing about this large language model. Because why? Because ChatGPT is not there anyway. So when this ChatGPT came in 2022, and then they realized there's an issue, and this is a really big issue that we should regulate in all purposes, like including higher education. So I think the problem is that whether we will have another challenging technology afterwards, and I'm sure the answer will be yes. So how the regulation can catch up with the development of technology, I think this is the first question. A second question that I really feel doubtful and feel challenging is now all this kind of, from a legal perspective, it's easier to regulate, for example, something existed, which means that the technology per se, the developer, the producer, whatever. But for example, many of the risk or harm are generated by the users, by the deployers. So we can see that, okay, this large language models or the AI applications built upon it, it is ethical, and it's we take everything into consideration. But the problem is that we cannot prohibit it or to intervene how like natural persons use it in an unethical way. So that is something, because it's always detected afterwards. So I think this is also, from a legal perspective, is another challenge. Yes.
Thank you. Catching up with technical developments, law catching up and policy catching up with technical developments is something, a topic that came up in our previous event back in November. And there was one more thing that was added to it, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on it, was also specifically in education when it comes to policies. In our case, faculties, they have their own policies, university has a policy. But if teachers want to experiment in ways that go beyond that policy, is there a way that policy or law can carve out certain exceptions or bake in exceptions into the law, into the policy, to allow that space for experimentation? Because if we don't experiment, we can't learn. So if we're not experimenting, we have to wait for someone else to do that. And with teaching, we can only do that in the classroom, right?
Yes.
To do it
Yes. I think this is also linked to Mira's question, because I think there is a kind of unbalanced later. So teachers can set up rules for students. You cannot use ChatGPT, or you should use it this way, that way. But how to supervise teachers to use generative AI in an ethical way? And as I mentioned, when I talk with many of my colleagues, I have no idea what generative AI it is. So there's how to explain what generative AI is. This is the first question, and what purposes and what kind of what is the proper use, ethical use of this kind of generative AI to them, to help them to, for example, for teaching purposes or for research purposes, is another question. So I think we also need to strike a balance between this tension. So it's, yeah.
Thank you. And then for Joao, the question is regarding creativity. Do you think generative AI can help us become more creative?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think some of my examples showcase that. What I would say is in its current form, and creativity is also a social context. concept, right? You are creative also by showing others, and others find your work creative is not only an individual process. But I think there are some limits to creativity also in the way that language models currently work and with the business model as well, because we have this central model. Even if OpenAI now says that they are creating GPTs, these are not still changing the baseline model. And so what you get out of those models, even with reinforcement learning, is still very sometimes generic, representative, what the average person on the internet will say, so to say. The development that I will be more excited about, and that I think is more exciting, and the Erasmus language model is kind of a direction that step, is that, for instance, if we each have our own personal language model, like you as a student feed it all of your assignments, it learns your writing style, it becomes part of what you trained, and then you use it without so many worries about copyright because it's something that you created yourself, that you personalized, that can help you become more creative. The same thing as for artists, right? If you have your own image generating model, digital art model that was trained on your work, fine-tuned by you and customized by you, that I think raises this potential to a new level, especially when paired with reinforcement learning. But the reality that we currently have is we have these monstrous models trained on everything that also have a huge carbon footprint that then make all of the outputs that we get more standardized, and everything becomes more standardized. And I think that becomes a problem. But I will be very excited if, for instance, within the European Union, supported by EU law and EU policy, we started having these individual models, the Erasmus language model, but maybe the SHCC language model, the Sonia language model, and so forth, right? And that's, I think, where we can harness these statistical representations of language to help us reach new heights as students, as teachers. Again, on the question of feedback, maybe a language model can give you better feedback than I can, right? I don't exclude that possibility. And especially with so little time that we have, and sometimes our language as teachers is not the most adequate. So I won't necessarily see the teacher as needed to be reprimanded, but I will require ownership of that work. And I will be much more comfortable with that if that was the teacher's own language model that learned from feedback that the teacher gave to previous students. So it knows it's consistent with the course, the students, and so forth. And I think that's the hurdle that we haven't crossed yet, and that I would like us to see, to cross and have a more decentralized way of AI. And I think that will bring benefits to education, but also to other domains that leverage creativity, like arts, cinema, music, and all of these different things.
Thank you. You mentioned feedback, so we do actually have a question about that relates to feedback that teachers provide for students or support they provide for students. There is a high school in the USA that has replaced teachers with AI and lets learners, the students, learn through AI tutors. Teachers are now coaches and guide students, and guides that only focus on personal growth. Thoughts? This is a question for the whole panel.
It depends so much on what that looks like. I mean, intuitively, I'm repulsed. But it could be wonderful. It just depends so much on what that looks like. If it is indeed something akin to what Joao was just mentioning, like where it's really a co-learning, co-created situation between all the different parties, you know, the students, the teachers, and the AI, then it's great. But it sounds like maybe some corners are trying to be cut somewhere. Maybe, I don't know.
I agree that the devil is in the details, probably because the way I read it is, does it, again, push us to rethink what education and learning is? Nowadays, in higher education especially, we keep saying that, yes, there is this academic learning that has always been part of higher education, but we also need to focus on professional skills and personal skills and 21st century or soft skills, whichever way you want to call them. We also need to focus on well-being. We need to focus on inclusion. We need to focus on tech skills. So the list keeps growing. And these are all important things. So is this a way to sort of outsource the more technical knowledge? Whether that's a good thing or not is probably the key issue here, and focus on these other things that haven't been as prominent in higher education before. This is not a higher ed example, but
very briefly, it's very easy to criticize OpenAI and to take the critical stance, and much of what you've heard from me is that. But of course, we have to recognize that current systems also have limitations, and these could be ways of overcoming limitations. And for instance, delivering more personalized education that we don't have. For instance, in the US, the reality of teachers is also very constrained, right? Yeah. Also, in a sense, those could be ways of overcoming issues that mean that the students in the end have a better educational experience. So I have my critical repulsion always in the background as well. But at the same time, I ask if we look at the specifics, could be
Yeah.
a benefit the same way I would ask to our classrooms here at Erasmus.
For me, honestly, AI could never replace the teachers because of the social aspect. After all, humans are social animals, like some call us. So I believe, for example, if we think about handwriting, AI cannot teach you handwriting. AI cannot really give you this personal touch of the teacher. Like if you look at how education changed recently with like the personalized approaches and all like the small classrooms and all of that, allow for more interaction and make the connection a bit more real and a bit more close between the teachers and the students. I believe that it could never replace that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think one of the most important thing for education, especially for higher education, is communication, interaction, and sometimes it's a kind of there's some emotional things inside. So I don't think this can be fully replaced by AI things. Also, I read something about law school in the US because actually there are some generative AI applications are developed there, especially for helping law school students how to research the legal cases, how to summarize. And their discussion is whether we should categorize, for example, students in different groups and limited access to this application to different group students. So as far as I learn, now they plan to only open the access. For example, they call it Lectures plus AI. This is kind of a generative AI application for laws purposes. And they only open this access to second year and third year law school students. So they do not open access to the first year law school students because they think basically the first year law school students still have the basic and the methodology behind how to, before they can access how this generative AI issues. Yeah, I think it makes some sense. Yes.
Again, from educational development perspective, I know that for decades now, there's a good number of teachers who keep saying, oh, we don't have to ask students to memorize things anymore because they can just Google anything. And from learning sciences show us, I was like, no, you still have to have, learning is about creating connections. And to create connections, you have to have certain ingredients in your head. So memorization is still important. It's not the crucial thing, it's not the most important thing, but it's still an essential element there. So in that sense, that structure seems to, from that perspective, it seems to make sense. By the way, we just had a quick response about the question about the USA school, and one of the audience members says, in my opinion, you can teach and coach at the same time. So again, it goes back to we need multiple skills, and that's closer to reality, versus we need to departmentalize things, which also tends to be a tendency in higher education especially, and the question how to balance that. Let me ask, because we're almost out of time, I could ask another question from the audience, or if you have a question or a comment that you would like to make before. Okay, question from the audience then. And it is about actually building up on the access to generative AI. AI tools and possibilities are evolving rapidly. People's reluctance to use it might be related to the limitations of, for example, ChatGPT 3.5 versus the paid version. To explore in the academia, does it require newest, richest tools? Or can we just go with the free version?
Yeah, I still stand by what I said earlier, but I believe we should use more something like the Erasmus language model, right? I mean, it's not definitely, and you mentioned it briefly, but in terms of sustainability, I don't know if everyone is aware that like AI training has exceeded flight, like the airline industry and cars and so it's like the most unsustainable practice on the planet at the moment. So using these tools is also increasing your carbon footprint. So use something better. For example, what researchers are building for you. Yeah.
It's also the definition of what is better, right? If it has more parameters, it's more costly. But does it know better what we are teaching here at Erasmus University. And one of the things I wanted to push with the Erasmus language model is maybe we don't need a model that can do everything for everybody, and we should have models that are more specialized for higher education or for Erasmus University, in which case you don't need GPT-4. You may need access to the one that's more fine-tuned to the social sciences or to university education, in which then universities can and should see what they can provide to students institutionally, like they provide access to academic papers, like they provide access to other tools like computers in the classroom. If that's a useful tool, then it shouldn't depend on the financial capability of the student to do that. But framing GPT-4 as better than 3.5, it is more complex, so of course it can produce more sophisticated answers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best possible model that you could have for what we are doing here. But yeah, we do see that asymmetry a bit. Sorry.
Thank you. And it is time. I would like to thank our panelists for today. And thank you for getting us started on this topic, for starting the conversation. The next step today as part of our program is we will take a break. We have refreshments for you in the foyer outside. Please take a minute and grab a drink or a snack, and we will soon see you in the Langeveld building, where we'll have table talks on specific aspects to continue this conversation and then bring it back during the third session afterward. Thank you very much.